On August 28, 2016, a man named Darrell Ward climbed into a small Cessna 182 Skylane somewhere outside Dallas, Texas. He had just spent the weekend at the Great American Truck Show, signing autographs, shaking hands with fans who recognized him from the show that had made him famous. He was heading home to Missoula, Montana, to start filming a new documentary, one about recovering plane wrecks buried in the wilderness. He never made it home. And the irony of that, a man heading to film a show about crashed planes dying in one, is the kind of detail that doesn't feel real until it is. That's the story we're getting into today. Not just Darrell Ward, but the full picture of what happened to the cast of Ice Road Truckers after the cameras stopped rolling. Because some of them survived the roads, the whiteouts, the pressure, the brutal cold, and then fell apart in ways nobody expected. The show that changed everything. If you're under 30, you might not fully appreciate what Ice Road Truckers meant when it first aired on June 17, 2007. The History Channel had been around for 12 years at that point, and nothing, not a single original program, had ever pulled the numbers this show did on its premiere night. 3.4 million viewers tuned in to watch a group of working truckers haul freight across frozen lakes in Canada's Northwest Territories, over roads made entirely of ice that could crack beneath a fully loaded 18-wheeler without warning. That was a record for the network. Not just a decent showing. A record. The New York Times called it impossible to watch without sharing in the cold, the fatigue, and what the critic described as a horrible highway hypnosis. The New York Post said everything about it was astonishing. For 11 seasons across a decade, from 2007 to 2017, the show ran. It came back from hiatus in 2025, 149 episodes total. At its peak, it was pulling audiences who had never given a second thought to long-haul trucking, suddenly glued to their screens watching guys named Hugh and Darrell and Alex navigate roads that most people would never drive on a dare. The premise was simple, but the reality was brutal. Every winter, when temperatures drop below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, a network of roads is built across frozen lakes and rivers in northern Canada and parts of Alaska. These roads only exist for a few weeks. The window is narrow, the loads are heavy, and if the ice breaks, there's no rescue. The show found real drivers doing this real job, put cameras on them, and let the tension speak for itself. What it created was something unusual in reality television. Cast members who were genuinely skilled, genuinely tough, and genuinely in danger. These weren't people auditioning for fame. They were people doing their jobs, and the cameras happened to be there. That authenticity is why years after the final season aired, people still care about them, still want to know what happened next. The answer isn't always easy to hear. The polar bear on thin ice, Hugh Rowland, came into Ice Road Truckers as the closest thing the show had to a natural villain, not because he was cruel, but because he was loud, competitive, and completely convinced that he was the best driver on any road, frozen or otherwise. He drove under the nickname Polar Bear, and he wore it like armor. He was the kind of guy who could make a 300-mile drive through a blizzard sound like a personal insult to anyone who thought the job was hard. For the first several seasons, Hugh was must-watch television. Fans either loved him or loved to argue about him, which for a reality show amounts to the same thing. Behind the wheel, he was as good as advertised. Reckless by some measures, fearless by others, but consistently capable of getting the load to the other end. Then came 2014, and something that had nothing to do with ice roads. During filming, Hugh Rowland was a passenger in a pickup truck being driven by a producer named Will Morrison. They were on a narrow dirt road in British Columbia when Morrison allegedly lost control of the vehicle. The truck veered off the road and crashed into trees. The impact left Rowland with severe injuries to the lower part of his spine. According to court documents filed as part of a subsequent lawsuit, those injuries left him unable to work as he once had, causing what his legal team described as profound physical and emotional suffering. His lawyers also argued that Morrison had been driving recklessly and had failed to take basic safety precautions. There was another detail in the lawsuit that attracted significant media coverage at the time, and it's worth noting because it speaks to how completely the accident upended his life. Hugh's wife alleged that his spinal injuries had severely damaged their marriage in ways that went well beyond the physical limitations. The lawsuit was filed in early 2014, and it named the executive producers of the show as defendants. The outcome of that legal action was not publicly resolved in a way that gave Hugh any clean victory. By season 9, Hugh Rowland was gone from the show. The man who had defined the first several years of Ice Road Truckers, the guy who froze his fingertips off during filming and kept going, was off the ice permanently, not because of a blowout or a cracked road or a whiteout, but because of a producer's pickup truck on a dirt road. He never returned. The irony is thick. The road didn't get Hugh Rowland. the show did The Man Who Fell from the Sky. Let's go back to Darrell Ward, because his story deserves the time it takes to tell it properly. Ward grew up in Montana, a working man's state with working man's values, and he embodied that identity without apology. He started appearing on Ice Road Truckers in Season 6 in 2012, and over the next 5 seasons he became one of the show's most reliable draws, not because he was loud or reckless, but because he was genuine. He talked like he thought, which in reality television is rarer than it sounds. Fans could tell the difference between a performance and a person, and with Darrell Ward they were watching a person. He drove for Carlisle Transportation in Alaska, running loads on the Dalton Highway, one of the most remote stretches of road in North America, 414 miles of gravel and permafrost running north from Fairbanks toward Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic coast. He was good at the job. Not the flashiest driver on the show, but relentlessly competent, and viewers respected that. By 2016, Ward was building towards something new. He'd created a trucking company of his own, and he'd connected with a production team about a new documentary series, one focused on recovering aircraft wrecks from the Montana wilderness. It was the kind of second-act story that felt earned. A guy who made his name on one dangerous job, pivoting to telling stories about dangerous things in general. He flew to Dallas for the Great American Truck Show, spent the weekend there, and on the morning of August 28, 2016, he and a pilot named Mark Malatz climbed into a Cessna 182 Skylane. The plane had taken off from Missoula 53 minutes before the crash. They were on approach to a small airstrip in Clinton, Montana when something went wrong. A certified commercial pilot who witnessed the crash from the ground later told the National Transportation Safety Board that the aircraft looked stable on final approach. No unusual behavior, no visible mechanical issues. Then, when the plane was approximately 40 feet above the runway, it suddenly veered 90 degrees to the right in what the witness estimated to be a 30-degree bank angle. It hit trees. It came down on the southbound shoulder of Interstate 90 near the Rock Creek exit. It caught fire. Darrell Ward was 52 years old. The NTSB investigated and ultimately concluded that the cause of the accident was the sudden right turn on approach to landing for reasons that could not be determined, because a post-accident examination did not reveal any anomalies that would have precluded normal operation. In other words, they checked every part of the plane and found nothing broken. Why the aircraft banked the way it did remains unknown. Mark Malatz, the pilot, also died. He was 56. Tributes came in from across the trucking world, from fellow cast members, from fans who had watched him on 11 seasons of television. His Facebook page, managed by people close to him, posted a statement confirming what had happened. The History Channel released a statement. The reality TV world paused for a moment, the way it rarely does. What made Ward's death land differently for people who followed the show was the timing. He had just finished something. He was on his way towards something new. The plane crash didn't happen in a blizzard on a mountain road while he was hauling a full load for a camera crew. It happened on a clear afternoon, on a short flight back home with no obvious cause and no explanation that gave anyone anything to hold on to. Some endings don't have a lesson. They just happen. The explosion in apartment 303. Art Burke was never the biggest name on Ice Road Truckers, but he was a constant presence, the kind of driver you root for because he never seems to get the credit he probably deserves. He appeared in the later seasons of the main show and in the spin-off Deadliest Roads. He worked out of the Northwest Territories, drove in conditions that would make most people reconsider their career choices, and built enough of a fan base that his name still comes up whenever people talk about the show. YouTube. Then came November 3, 2018. Not on an ice road, not on the Dalton Highway. In the bathroom of his Yellowknife apartment, according to court documents, Burke was attempting to make a cannabis concentrate called shatter, a highly potent extract that, when made correctly, has the consistency of hard candy. The process requires butane, which is the same substance used in disposable lighters and camp stoves, and which also happens to turn from liquid to gas at room temperature. If you're making shatter in an enclosed space, like, say, an apartment bathroom, butane vapor accumulates fast, and butane vapor, when ignited by anything at all, detonates. Yellowknife apartment building post-explosion. The explosion blew the bathroom door off its hinges. It rattled neighboring units throughout the building. The damages to the 54th Street building were assessed at over 60,000 Canadian dollars. Art Burke himself suffered burns to 40% of his body. He spent 12 days in hospital recovering. In one heartbeat, Burke later said in a background report filed in court, "Everything I worked for vanished." He was charged with causing arson by negligence. In 2020, he pleaded guilty. The sentencing hearing, which took place in Yellowknife, was notable for its own peculiar drama. Burke actually arrived late to his own sentencing, which caused the judge, who had already expressed skepticism about the proposed penalty, to become further irritated. The Crown prosecutor and Burke's defense lawyer had agreed on a sentence of 18 months of house arrest, and they had further requested that Burke be permitted to serve part of that sentence in the cab of his truck so he could continue working. The judge pushed back. She asked the lawyers to justify why a man who had just caused $60,000 in property damage and spent 12 days in a burn unit should be allowed to keep driving commercially during his sentence. They provided the justification. The judge agreed. Burke was sentenced to 18 months of house arrest, with provisions that allowed him to continue driving. His attorneys cited his lack of any prior criminal record, the significant time that had already elapsed since the explosion, and the severe injuries he had already sustained, injuries he had caused to himself. Burke said in interviews after the sentencing that the explosion had cost him nearly everything he had saved, including money he had set aside for retirement. Today, according to available reporting, he lives on Prince Edward Island, keeping a low profile, trying to piece together something quieter than what came before. The driver who crossed a different line. And then there's Timothy Zika. Zika appeared in Season 5 of Ice Road Truckers and in the Deadliest Roads spin-off. He was not among the show's marquee names, not a Hugh Rowland or a Darrell Ward, but he had a following, the kind built over years of being a reliable, competent presence on screen. He drove in conditions that most people will only ever see through a window, and he did it well enough to keep getting invited back. What happened in 2015 had nothing to do with trucks, according to court records. Zika became involved in a dispute with a woman over money. Prosecutors allege that he accused her of taking money from him. What followed, according to those same court records, was a criminal act that prosecutors described as both deliberate and violent. Zika allegedly kidnapped the woman, restrained her, and confined her inside a closet. While she was being held, he allegedly demanded money and made threats. At some point during the incident, he attempted to flee, and investigators later recovered a pair of flip-flops he left behind at the scene, which they used as physical evidence to connect him to the crime. Zika pleaded guilty to charges of kidnapping and extortion. He was sentenced to a prison term ranging from 5 to 15 years. As of the time this script was researched, his current parole or release status is unclear. Court records do not indicate a public update on where he stands today. It's worth being direct about something here. The show's producers had no way of knowing what any of these men might do after the cameras stopped rolling. Reality television doesn't perform background checks on its cast members' futures. But Zika's story sits in a different category from the others in this video. Art Burke made a dangerous, reckless choice that hurt people and hurt himself. Hugh Rowland got hurt by someone else's negligence. Darrell Ward died. Those are tragedies and accidents, however complicated. What Zika was convicted of was a deliberate choice to harm someone. The court made that determination, not speculation, and it's worth saying plainly. The ones who made it out. Not every story here ends badly. Lisa Kelly deserves to be mentioned, because she represents something different from the narrative that tends to follow reality TV casts once the show is over. Kelly joined Ice Road Truckers in its third season in 2009 as the first woman featured as a regular cast member. She drove in Alaska, running the Dalton Highway, and she stayed with the show through most of its run, missing only the sixth season due to a combination of exhaustion and contract disputes, before returning for seasons 7 through 11. She drove for Carlisle Transportation while on the show, then moved to Polar Industries and later to a company started by Darrell Ward. After the show ended in November 2017, Kelly didn't disappear. She kept driving. In 2018, she told Diesel Spec Inc. that she was spending her time rescuing horses in Alaska, something she described as a lifelong passion. She started showing up at trucking exhibitions in England, Scotland, and Ireland, places where the show had built a loyal audience she hadn't expected. She's active on social media, including TikTok and YouTube, where she documents current drives rather than chasing a revival of old fame. She lives in Fairbanks with her husband, Traves. She does mounted archery of all things. She has horses. She trucks in the winter. There's something grounding about that picture. In a story full of plane crashes and explosions in courtrooms, here's a woman who just kept doing the job. Alex Debogorski, another long-running cast member who became one of the show's most recognized faces, the deeply Catholic, enormously bearded father of 11 children from Yellowknife, has also stayed out of trouble and stayed connected to fans. He's been doing public appearances and trucker events in the years since the show wrapped. Hot cars. The ice road for some of them was always just the job. They drove it, they got paid for it, they went home, where the road ends. Ice Road Truckers returned from a long hiatus in 2025. The show is back, according to its Wikipedia page, after an 8-year absence. New episodes, new drivers, a new chapter. History Channel clearly believes there's still appetite for the premise. Given how the original series performed, setting records for the network on its very first night of broadcast, that's probably a reasonable bet. But the original cast, the faces that built the show, have scattered in every direction. Darrell Ward is buried in Montana, gone since 2016 at 52 years old, for reasons the NTSB could never fully explain. Burke is living quietly on Prince Edward Island, legally clear but financially hollowed out, trying to rebuild something after an explosion of his own making. Hugh Rowland is off the ice permanently, injured in an accident that had nothing to do with the roads he'd navigated for years, living with the physical consequences of someone else's recklessness. Zika was convicted of kidnapping and extortion and sentenced to up to 15 years in prison, the most severe outcome of anyone connected to the show. The show sold itself on danger, frozen lakes, cracking ice, whiteouts at 60 miles per hour with 40 tons of steel behind you. And the danger was real. Nobody is disputing that. But when you look at where the cast actually got hurt, actually fell apart, actually ended up in places they couldn't come back from, it almost never happened on the road. It happened in apartments and pickup trucks and small planes on sunny afternoons. It happened in courtrooms. It happened quietly when the audience wasn't watching. Reality television has a habit of showing you the most dramatic version of a life and then cutting to commercial. What you don't see is what fills the other 22 hours of every day, the decisions that nobody films, the phone calls that don't happen in front of a camera, the moments where a choice is made that a person can't take back. These drivers spent years being watched. They were famous for surviving dangerous things, and then the show ended, and the cameras went away, and some of them kept surviving and some of them didn't. Here's the question I keep turning over. If the show is coming back and new drivers are signing up to be on it, knowing the full history now, knowing what it looked like for the cast that came before them, what does it say about what we're still willing to watch? Drop your take in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on that one. If this kind of deep dive content is what you're looking for, subscribing keeps you in the loop when the next one drops. We do these regularly. See you on the next one.